NATO is holding an extraordinary meeting at its headquarters in Brussels. In all, about 20 countries, most members of NATO and the European Union, but not all, are funneling arms into Ukraine to fight off Russia. But Moscow considers that a dangerous intervention. Also in attendance at today's meetings are two key non-NATO members, Finland and Sweden. For more, let's speak to our foreign editor, Philip Turle. Hello to you, Philip. This extraordinary meeting of NATO coming, as we've heard, increasingly threatening remarks by Russia's President Vladimir Putin. What more can NATO do?
Well, I think that one of the things that has come out of the conflict in Ukraine over the past week is a reinforcing, a strengthening of the resolve of the NATO countries to stand firmly together in the face of what they see as Russian aggression. So, as we've been hearing earlier today in a statement by the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, he's been saying that NATO is a defensive organization. That is not the way that Vladimir Putin sees it. He's been describing NATO as an offensive organization which basically has plans to invade Russia and to cause Russia problems. Antony Blinken's been saying it's a defensive organization, but that NATO will not hesitate to defend its member states if they are aggressed. Now, the most important thing here is Article 5 of NATO, which is the all for one and one for all. So if there is an attack by against one of the 50 NATO states, then the other NATO states will come to its rescue and will send in military support. Yesterday we were hearing remarks by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying that his country had to be safe. Remember that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. That's why NATO forces are not in there, saying that his country had to be safe because if it was not, then he said, you will see that Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia will be next. Well, those three countries are all members of NATO. They joined in 2004. So I think there is concern on the part of NATO that nobody really knows what President Putin's end game is here, that they don't want to be confronting Russia. So they are building up their forces along their eastern flank in a sort of dissuasive measure, a dissuasive way against the Russians in the hopes that will maybe make President Putin think twice about invading into Eastern Europe. But President Putin's not stupid. He knows that in Ukraine, no one's going to come to Ukraine's rescue by sending in troops, but he knows that if he were to go further than that, he would be up against an alliance, and that would certainly not be the same sort of warfare.
Yeah, and moments ago we saw a statement from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky saying that if NATO did enforce a no-fly zone, then there wouldn't be a bombing on a nuclear plant, as we saw. Philip, also in attendance at this meeting are two non-NATO members, Finland and Sweden. These are countries that have tried to historically have, amicable relations with Moscow. How significant is it?
Well, both Sweden and Finland have been NATO partners, not full members of NATO since the mid-1990s. But this is quite a significant development because both of them have been not willing to join NATO. They want to remain independent countries, neutral countries. But two opinion polls which have been published in the last week by their respective broadcasters have shown a swing and a shift in public opinion. If you look at the poll commissioned by the Finnish broadcaster YLE, it now shows 53% of Finns favour joining NATO, and the one for Sweden by SVT, the Swedish public broadcaster, shows 41% of Swedes in support and 35% against joining NATO. That's the first time there has been a majority in Sweden for joining the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So we're seeing a shift, and I think this has woken both countries up to the fact that they could be vulnerable, seeing what's happening in Ukraine. They're not members of NATO. NATO would therefore not come, in theory, to their rescue if they were invaded by Russia. And I think that has begun to worry many people in those two countries that they could be in a very vulnerable position. And Russia has already said if they do join NATO, this could have very serious repercussions in the future. But Finland's made it pretty clear that, well, we've heard this many times over the years, especially since the Second World War. You have to remember that at that time it was the Swedes who came to the rescue of Finland that was being attacked by the Soviet Union. There's been no problems since then, but I think there is worry now that maybe there could be, if they're not NATO members, better to be a NATO member than not, even if the Russians are still rattling their swords at them, saying don't join NATO. Could be risky for you in the long run.
Yeah, more and more governments seeming to think we have entered a new world order. Thank you very much, Philip. Philip Turle, France 24's foreign editor.